Dark Mon Rises is a D&D campaign which you can play without a dungeon master. Basically, you can play with up to 4 human players, 1 to 4. Each person makes a player character of their choice using any player's handbook they want. I mean, the 2014 or 2024. The plot is basically your characters have been born with a mark on their shoulder called the Dark Moon. It's considered a symbol of evil, but fortunately there is a way of removing it. You can go on a pilgrimage, and at the end of the pilgrimage you get your Dark Moon removed. The only trouble is that the pilgrimage has become increasingly dangerous in recent years, and so hopefully you'll be able to kind of break the string of bad luck that has afflicted the pilgrimage and get your Dark Moons removed. There's been a number of solo D&D systems have been created where the players effectively act as their own dungeon master, and I do like them. One of the issues is you have to be very imaginative for it to work. It also requires a lot of concentration to maintain that narrative in your head. Some people don't like the random sort of actions of solo D&D books because they're normally kind of charts of tables. You roll to see what quests you get, what monsters appear, and it can feel kind of very artificial. Our DMless system operates in a different way. The adventure is pre-written by a dungeon master, and there's you get to decide what you're going to do in it. So you just get to be a player. One of the main ways I came up with it is one of my earlier projects was called Legendary Kingdoms, and that was a game book that was designed for a party of up to 4 people. And the original idea behind it was that it would be a solo game. So, one person's controlling 4 party members. But what I found in practice was that a lot of people were playing it around a table. They'd be getting their friends and family near them, or they'd be playing it online on like a TTRPG kind of online system, and everyone would take a character and they'd be making decisions jointly. And when I saw that, I thought maybe something like that can work with Dungeons and Dragons. So kind of the penny dropped. Well, there's a saying, perfect is the enemy of good. And I think that a lot of designers struggled with the fact that if they were going to do a DM-less version of Dungeons and Dragons, it had to be perfect. It had to capture all the things that D&D does absolutely perfectly, with no room for rules errors. And that's a thing which psychologically I think I managed to overcome. So for instance, in D&D, spells do all kinds of crazy things, and it's hard to adjudicate them sometimes. There's lots of different monsters, they all have different abilities. What's a good way of making the monsters behave realistically, kind of, fairly? How do you control so many characters? And also, you just have things such as D&D 5th edition can be awkward because it makes a lot of things that game designers rely on almost obsolete. So things like light, ammunition, healing, and all those sorts of things. And the process is trying to overcome that, I think. Well, I tried to take clues from the 5th edition system itself. For example, 5th edition doesn't care about lighting. Almost every species and race has got dark vision. The light cantrip is you can cast as many times as you like. D&D in a modern sense doesn't want to worry about lighting, so I don't worry about it either. D&D doesn't really care about ammunition. Cantrips can be cast whenever you like. Combats tend to only last 4 or 5 rounds. Quivers have got 20 arrows in them. D&D doesn't really want you to worry about it, and so I don't worry about it either. I take the cue from the game. And also, D&D doesn't want you to worry about hit points after you've had a long rest. There are hardcore rules that exist in the DMG which slow your hit point recovery, but players, generally speaking, they've got more than enough hit points to sort of things like hit dice and spells in order to get themselves back up to full power. Most of the time, after people have had a long rest, they get up to full strength. Because that's what happens in D&D most of the time, I use the most forgiving version of healing in my version of D&D. You take a long rest and everything is restored. That's the intention of the rules designers. That's what I do too. Now, it's not that I don't like those other things. I think really I'm an old school grognard at heart. I like lighting, I like restricted ammunition and kind of, restricted resources, and you worrying about going into battles. The big thing is that 5th edition doesn't worry about those things. And as soon as I stop trying to butt heads with the system and flow with it, the DM-less system came. Well, D&D is a party-based game. It doesn't work very well if you just have one party member. Every player character is designed to have weaknesses, for instance, which need to be filled in by the group as a whole. So it was important that we had a group of PCs going on an adventure together. But controlling lots of full-powered PCs is very complicated. So what we did instead is that we created NPCs that could join the party, but they're simplified. They're sort of statistically stronger than most PCs are, but they've got fewer special abilities. So they tend to have more hit points, better attributes and so forth, but they don't have lots of abilities that trigger on special rules. They don't tend to have things that you need to track lots of. They take their turn and then their turn is done. And just so that they're not too dull to use, there is a simple leveling up system so that you don't leave the NPCs well behind, when you get to 5th level and so forth. There's also just a little way of, there are some magical items which NPCs can have, which kind of improve their abilities as well. So they're not completely flat, but they are designed to be very easy to use, so it's not taking up your brain space while playing. Well, I found that players are actually very good at interpreting spells and how they work themselves. There's a big danger as a rule designer to over-regulate these things. You might worry, I've got to make sure that blast radiuses have specific rules. I've got to ensure that monsters don't zap their own friends. You can end up creating so many sub-rules and kind of conditions in your rule system that they become impossible, they become overburdened. The simple fact is that players do tend to understand the spells that they cast, and they're also they know when when monsters are casting spells, how those spells work too. And I think it's important to empower players to be able to interpret those spells without me having to provide whole lists of exceptions and reminders about what to do. People are just perfectly capable of doing it themselves. And once I've discovered that, I realised that my fear of all the spells in D&D kind of evaporated away. Well, in one way it does. It's kind of a yes and no. So on the one hand, yes, players know how the monsters are going to behave. But to compensate, the battles are quite tricky. I'd probably include slightly more monsters in an encounter than a dungeon master normally would. So if you're going to be, when you're fighting these battles, you need to know what the monsters are doing. You have to use that tactical information in order to win. So that's kind of how we balance that out. So the battle maps, they were an early obsession of mine. I wanted to create a Dungeons and Dragons game where I had a cardboard kind of board which was 8 inches by 10 inches, and then you put little tokens on the board to represent the walls and the terrain and so forth, so it could be very modular and very clever. It was 8 by 10 inches because that's the same size as kind of like a book for all intents and purposes, and I say for a book. When we went into playtesting, we discovered that although the 8 by 10 board it works, the issue is that Dungeons and Dragons is made to work in a 5-foot scale, not a 10-foot scale. So it was kind of a real pain because you were always like counting, oh, it's 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. Oh, my wood elf's got 35-foot movement speed, and it just, there are all kinds of these little problems. And so my colleague Nick Ray mentioned what you really want is a 16 by 20 foot battle board, and I said, well, that's great, Noel, but that won't fit behind a book. That's massive. And so eventually the battle map idea was scrapped, or rather it became a case of we'll have 16 by 20, but what we're not going to do is actually, kind of print the battle maps. Wizards of the Coast, for instance, when they release adventures, what they don't do is also give you free unfoldable maps with them. That doesn't exist. So I just thought, people already have solutions to this problem and I can just forget about it. But when we were developing the full battles for Domain of the Deathless King, our designer for those maps, a very talented man called Jose, he had a tough brief because his maps had to look good small as well as big. But what we found is that when we zoomed in on the maps, there were really, really good details. So actually they would look great if they were printed full size. And eventually, just very slowly, we came to this idea of, we will release the battle maps as an option. So we'll do PDF versions for people who want to print their own. And actually we'll do some printed ones. So if people want to go all in, we'll do some printed battle maps as well. We thought we might sell, 100 packs. In the Kickstarter itself, it was by far the most popular of all of the pledges. Well over half of people wanted all the books and all the battle maps. We did go a little bit overboard on the quality of the battle maps, but people seem to like them so much that we're going to keep them for the next campaign as well. Yes. So having played both versions, what I can tell you is that lower level characters in the 2024 edition are a bit stronger than the 2014 ones. But that difference irons out very quickly. By the time you're 5th level, the power is generally roughly the same. And that's mostly, it comes down to the action economy in Dungeons & Dragons, because in both versions of the game you've got one move, one action and one bonus action. Eventually your characters end up with so many different options, you can only do a certain amount of things in one round. So it works just fine with both. What I would say is that when choosing kind of what rulebook you like, my advice would be pick one to be your master book and go with that. So if you're using the 2024 book, use the rules structures in that, for all the spells and so forth. If you're using 2014, then just go with the rules in that. In the long run, it doesn't make a vast difference. The challenges are still high, so it works with both. You will have a slightly easier time of it in the very earliest books in the series, but they're tough challenges, so you probably need all the help you can get anyway. Okay, so the system that I've created works very well up to a point. So D&D gets increasingly complicated as you go along. When you start getting to sort of 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th level, it's not merely that your characters become more complicated, the monsters do as well. The stat blocks start getting very, very big. So if you look at a standard demon stat block, for instance, some of them are enormous. The classic vampire stat block is the size of an A4 page. It gets to the point where you can't do what we've been doing with the books. So you've got a page which has got a battle map in one corner and kind of like stats in the rest. You'll need to start going to multiple pages, and you'll need to start doing that for every battle. And the books need to get thicker and thicker. Also, as characters develop more resources, you have to continually restrict the number of rests that they can have in order to maintain the peril. Because high-level characters can cope with ever more encounters. And the Domain of the Deathless King system, it works absolutely fine, but it cracks the further higher level you go. Is it an insurmountable problem? Probably not. It probably just requires a bit of additional thought. But I would say, principally, I like lower level adventures. I like going from first level to top level. I like doing it as a dungeon master. I like doing it as a player, because that's how you really develop yourself. You're going from zero to hero. There's very different taste in how you play Dungeons and Dragons at low levels compared to high, and I like that journey. And I hope you guys do too. But I'll look into high level stuff. Maybe I can crack it. Because it's Archmage's first project, we instinctively went with the most popular version of D&D, which is 5th edition. But the first version of the game that I was working on was, in fact, it used, for all intents and purposes, the basic Dungeons and Dragons rules from 1980. I like old school gaming. I'm a big fan of things like Shadow Dark and old school essentials, and kind of that whole mass of the OSR. Do I want to do a game? Yes, I do. Do it when things have settled down. I won't fully abandon modern D&D, I promise. But there's something really cool about old school adventures that excites me. And I think I can do a modern version of old school and bring people the joy that it used to bring me when I was a kid. Something about those very open sandboxy adventures where you're not perhaps the kind of medieval superheroes that you are in 5th edition. So stay tuned. I'm working on it. Legendary Kingdoms. Legendary Kingdoms is my baby. It's a whole new system and a whole new world which I created. Legendary Kingdoms is in one sense it's a classic game book. It's designed for one person, but to take that person to take a whole party of adventurers through. It's quite sophisticated. You not only control your 4 party members, but you can sort of have ships. You can control armies. Spells are discovered through exploration rather than simply going up levels. You can find them in ancient temples or old books as you go. Legendary Kingdoms is incredibly reactive, so cities can rise and fall by your actions. Your characters themselves have personal backstories which you can explore. And every book is a different geographic region with its own culture to explore and people to interact with. It's a system I feel an intense kind of kinship with. My plan is that I'm going to write books 4, 5, and 6 after I've finished Dark Mon Rises, which will take a while. Though Archmage Press will keep making and releasing titles in the interim. But all 6 books together will tell an amazing story. Those of you who know Legendary Kingdoms, you know how good it is. I'm very excited at the prospect of being able to finish it. You'll hear lots more about it a little bit later. But yeah, that's what I'm going to be doing after this, and it's going to be very, very exciting. Sure, two things. We've got quite an extensive frequently asked questions on the Kickstarter website, so do have a look at that. If your question isn't answered there, if you do an email to hello@archmagepress.com, that question will be answered. It'll either be answered by Mel, or if necessary, it'll be answered by me if it's a really technical question. Ask us anything you like. It's fine. We normally respond to everything, except abuse. Hopefully we will see you there at the Kickstarter. So enjoy.